And now, to introduce the Imagination in Service to Society awardee, please welcome a professor at the University of California, San Diego in the Department of Neurosciences and director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, Dr. Eric Veree.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Walda and the Foundation Board for allowing me this privilege. And as the board and Walda always know, when I get up with the microphone, I get to talk about Arthur C. Clarke. So Clarke was an icon of the 20th century, as we've heard, but his personal story is perhaps even more relevant to tonight's award winner. So Sir Arthur was a healthy man, and he helped in the British establishment during World War II and thought about traveling to space, as we've heard about. But Sir Arthur also had different romantic proclivities than the common people in society. And he suffered the opprobrium of the English society because of that. And in fact, he left England in the mid-1950s, perhaps partly because of how the society thought and looked at him. He was an other. He did travel the world and was an underwater explorer. In fact, he was one of the first people to use the aqualung invented by Jacques Cousteau for underwater exploration, which he did because he thought that would give him an experience of what it would like to be flying in space. Importantly, Clarke was a diver, was a healthy man, and had missions and plans. And then in 1962, he was stricken with polio and became paralyzed, and so was unable to complete the underwater explorations that he had planned on. So he, through an unanticipated event, medical event in his life, lost much of his mobility. In the early 1960s, he was awarded contracts for some of his most famous books, perhaps my personal favorite, Rendezvous with Rama, and also my other personal favorite, Profiles of the Future, a nonfiction view of what science would be in the future. So with these views of society, with these changes to his body, with these things that happened to him, Clarke entered this incredible era of imagination in his writing, and ultimately leading to the filming of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And for you space aficionados and HAL 9000 people out there, your homework assignment is to do the sequel of 2001, 2010, where we learn a little bit more about HAL 9000 and why he did what he did. And in fact, there's a cameo of Sir Arthur in 2010. So your homework, I'm a professor, so I have to assign homework. So your homework assignment is to watch 2010: A Space Odyssey. So Sir Arthur is highly relevant to our awardee this evening. So Dr. Nnedi Okorafor is the inspired writer of a new era of science fiction called African futurism, and is well known for many, many books in this genre. However, my favorite book of Dr. Okorafor is her own story, the story of her own life, called Broken Places and Outer Spaces. And I noted that it was dedicated to her mother, Dr. Helen Okorafor. So Nnedi shared with me that being a PhD was a big thing in their family, and of course, accordingly, earned and received a PhD in English literature. So Nnedi, I know your mother is extremely proud of you for that, but perhaps far more proud of all the accomplishments you've made in the service of your craft, which includes so many wonderful things, perhaps most notably the Binti series, and a little shameless plug for the University of California at San Diego. We are the host of the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop, which Dr. Okorafor was a student in and got a scholarship before it was at UCSD. Dr. Nnedi has won many awards, the notable science fiction awards, the Hugo and Nebula Awards, and importantly, not only for adult science fiction, but also for youth science fiction, reaching out to audiences of all ages and interests. But I think the biggest award is in the offing, getting your book made into a multi-part series. So we're anxiously waiting for that, Nnedi. We want to see it. So with that, I would like to say congratulations, Dr. Nnedi Okorafor. We appreciate your service.
Please welcome this year's recipient of the Clark Award for Imagination in Service to Society, Dr. Nnedi Okorafor.
It is with great pleasure the Arthur C. Clarke Foundation bestows upon Dr. Nnedi Okorafor its Imagination in Service to Society Award. The award is for unforgettable speculative fiction and African futurism for youth and adults.
Bonsoir. Thank you so much. The award is beautiful, and I'd like to thank the Arthur C. Clarke Foundation for this award. It's such a great honor, and also Arthur C. Clarke for just being Arthur C. Clarke. Yes, you can clap. So I write African-based science fiction. African futurism, one word, no capital F. I coined this term because I felt the concept needed a name to be understood. African futurism is concerned with visions of the future, is interested in technology, leaves the earth, skews optimistic, and is centered and predominantly written by people of African descent, Black people. It is rooted first and foremost in African-originated culture, people, politics, and points of view. It's less concerned with what could have been and more concerned with what is, can, and will be. It acknowledges and grapples with and carries what has been. So I was an avid reader, but I didn't start writing African futurism because of anything that I read previously. I read many types of things, however, and I didn't feel like science fiction was really the place for me. I couldn't relate to it. It wasn't accessible. I started writing African futurism because of my family trips to Nigeria. I was born and raised in the United States. Both of my parents were born and raised in Nigeria, and from a young age, they started taking my siblings and me back to Nigeria to reconnect with our family, our culture, the land, and so on. These trips bolstered and solidified my identity and my point of view as a Nigerian American, as a Niger-American, one word also. Before I started writing when I was 20, I was very much an observer, an unconscious collector of interesting happenings, a curious and conscious witness with an eye and an ear for trouble in particular, the forbidden, the conflicting, social energy. If there was a hint that I was a writer, that I'd be a writer, it was in those things. As I got older, I started noticing and understanding a lot more. In particular, I started noticing technology, specifically when it came to cell phones, as soon as cell phones showed up. When we would visit Nigeria, the first half of the visit would be to the very futuristic mega city of Lagos. And then the second half of our trip would be to my parents' ancestral villages in the southeast. These were villages where huge mansions were built, but they wouldn't have electricity or running water due to a lack of infrastructure. There was also lush farmland and forests that looked like jungle to my American eyes. And within this, because there was no running water, girls from the village would go out and collect the day's water from streams. And that's a very traditional African practice, right? It's a very traditional African image. I'd see palm wine tappers shimmy up palm trees to collect palm sap from buckets that they'd placed there just days before at the tree's crown. Then, in the early 2000s, I started noticing the same scenario, but with one difference: cell phones. Chargeable handheld supercomputers were showing up in a part of the world where the infrastructure for electricity and running water was still spotty. Interesting. Now I was seeing these same girls collecting the water as usual, but holding their cell phones away so the phones wouldn't get wet. I'd see palm wine tappers leaning back on their leather belts high in the tree to check their phones. I started thinking about all of these things, and in particular, I started thinking about what would the future be like in this place? I wasn't seeing this point of view reflected in literature. I wasn't seeing these visions or imaginings of the future and possibilities anywhere. And I wanted to read about these things. I wanted to see these things explored and brought to life in narrative. So when I didn't find it, well, I started writing it. And so this was my arrival at science fiction. The need to see what the future would be like in these specific places in Africa, our own Indiazog, Nigeria, led me to start speculating about broader things through a lens born from my hybrid Nigerian-American cultural identity blended with my unique strain of curiosity and imagination. What if most cars in Nairobi were autonomous? What if aliens with powerful technology landed in Botswana? What if a robot was built in Ghana by a girl who'd never been outside of her small town? What if the Sahara Desert became the world's greatest source of infinite green energy, the sun? I actually explored that in my novel, Noor. What if an AI built and taught by South Africans became president of Nigeria? It's possible. How would Niger change if it used its uranium for its own needs? I explored this in my novel Shadow Speaker, where Niger used its uranium to create capture stations, cheap portable devices that could pull drinking water from the clouds. I don't care for labels and categories. In general, I find them to be confining and reductive. I usually shy away from them. However, the fact is, names can have power. They snap complex concepts into focus. Where a concept was hard to understand, a name can make it instantly recognizable and understood. And so, I offer you African futurism. It's not a new idea, but now it has a name, and I write it. Thank you.